You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio, the 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from local area around the world. We're very fortunate this show. We've interviewed the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, sports psychologists, you name it, they've been on the show. Really interesting guest. We've also spoken to some of the world's most influential people in field of psychology and related fields, give us their insights. Today we have a fascinating guest who actually studied at the University of Salford, so not too far away from where we are. He's working for St Mirren. I'm sure he'll tell us a lot more about his role, the head of academy and sports science and medicine. I'm sure he'll tell us more about that and sort of do his position more justice than what I can do in terms of doing the intro. But he's doing great work up there, and he'll give us an insight into what his work involves and our general conversation around sports and other related areas. So, David Hartley, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board, David. So, just for our guest, in terms of just sort of, if you could let our guests know what you do, what your role is at the moment, please, David.
Yes, as you mentioned, I'm head of academy, sports science and medicine, so that kind of involves sports science and kind of medical provision for our players at St Mirren, from under 11s when Sam's club, all the way through to under 18s, which is our kind of professional team. And then kind of managing that transition into hopefully the first team long term, or certainly having a career within football if that's elsewhere.
And what was the inspiration to go into that, David? What sort of inspired you to sort of go into that field?
So my background's really in kind of injury rehab, really. So I kind of got into that just through my own experiences, really, of being injured when I was a youngster myself, and just kind of developed an interest in it and how to get better, how to stop it happening in the first place. And when I was at high school, they had an open day with a lot of universities, so Salford was also one of those, and it really piqued my interest in sports rehab, which is what my undergrad degree's in. And that really sparked the interest really in terms of making a career out of that.
Brilliant. And what was your experience like at Salford? How did you find the experience at Salford Uni?
Yeah, I loved it. I'm from the northwest originally, so just kind of an hour north of Salford, Burnley. Salford was kind of it was ideal really in terms of you were just far enough away from home to be independent, but still close enough to get home if you needed to really. So it was perfect for me.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the content of the course, we've got some really world-leading experts on that course that I could have learned from.
Absolutely.
And kind of the likes of Lee Harrington, Paul Comfort, those kind of guys. You can't really get better people than them in their field, really. So it was real kind of privilege to be able to learn from them on a day-to-day basis, really. And then obviously, in terms of their connections with the industry, being able to get out into different clubs around about the northwest and beyond that was really kind of valuable in terms of developing that competency in an applied setting. Salford was the perfect place for me to kind of study and get a foothold in the industry, really.
Absolutely. No, you've made some great points. They're obviously a very well respected university and some great people there as well. So, what sort of better way to prepare to go out there and obviously, I suppose sort of studying is one thing, but when you're out there, in terms of what was it like to sort of make the transition to work for a professional, to work for a club for you, David? What would you say some of the challenges were to sort of work at a professional football club?
Yeah, I think the challenge for most people really when they're first starting out is just to get a foot in the door.
Yeah,
it's such a competitive industry that there's obviously probably 2 or 3 people going for every role, so you obviously got to try and make yourself stand out. So that was probably the biggest challenge really. I think what Salford did for me really was I'd say those contacts with clubs in the industry. Your whole final year is essentially placements in different settings, and it also gives you an idea, an insight into what the role is like in various settings like professional sport, or private practice, or kind of even the NHS. So I was really lucky that my final year I got some really good placements. I did a placement at Plymouth Albion, all the way down south for a month. I shadowed a couple of consultants at hospitals in the northwest. I shadowed Ian Hawes at his private practice over in Wakefield, which was valuable. He's another one that's absolutely excellent in his field, and I learned a lot from him. And I also had a placement at Accrington Stanley.
Okay,
Which is actually where I went to school in Accrington, so it kind of came full circle, really.
Yeah.
And I think I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, because at the end of that academic year, a role came up within their academy. And they offered it me, so I've obviously hopefully left a good impression, and I was offered a role within their academy straight out of uni, so I was probably quite lucky in that respect. But as I say, Salford probably put me in a good position to be able to kind of take advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely. And that's a great point you've made. And I suppose for like anyone we have a lot of people who listen to the show involved in sport as well. I mean, how important do you think it is that sort of clubs do give the opportunity for like students to get the placements? I mean, is that something that you sort of think is sort of crucial to development? Because obviously, learning is one thing, but having that practical application is obviously a massive learning experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think learning from a textbook or in a classroom is one thing, but being able to apply that in a setting where you've got all sorts of different variables, especially in sport where you've got kind of different kind of pressures from lots of different stakeholders, I think it's important that you're exposed to that fairly early and be able to kind of adapt to that. So I think it's so important. It's something that I've kind of taken on through my career, really. And even at St Mirren now, I'll try and take students as much as I can really and give them opportunities, whether that's kind of formal internships or kinds of voluntary students shadowing. It's something that I value now that I've kind of had that experience, to be able to kind of filter that down to the next generation coming through, really.
Absolutely. And I suppose like a club like Accrington, it's a fantastic club, a lot of good people at the club as well, and I think that obviously I suppose at the very highest level in football the resources are different. But how did you find like Accrington, obviously in terms of the opportunity there, like facilities and that sort of stuff? Was it sort of, did you manage to implement were you able to sort of implement some of the things you'd learned from uni, or how was the experience like overall?
Yeah, I think it helps really going into that role, because I've been there for a month or two prior to that, so I knew what I was coming into in terms of the resources they've got. At the time, they were kind of fairly new to the football league. I've been in the non-league for a long time, and
that's right.
They'll kind of just find their feet and trying to survive basically in League Two. So the resources, you can imagine, were fairly kind of basic. But again, I see that as a strength really in terms of kind of my development, because you can have every tool under the sun, which is great, but you've got to think outside the box a little bit when you don't have those resources.
Absolutely.
And that, I think that kind of certainly helped kind of develop my competency in rehabbing things, because it's probably arguably a bit easier once you've got a lot of resources there, because you can fall back on a lot of stuff. But when you've got the very, very basics, I think you've got to rely a little bit more on your kind of professional skills a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
No, 100%. That's fascinating. I think that's really interesting stuff, and for sure. And I think that's some really important points. I think some important takeaways for anyone really, but anyone sort of coming into the game now, and obviously respectfully to sort of clubs that in the lower leagues, obviously the Premiership clubs, and generally the resources are, there's going to be no expense paid generally, but obviously things have improved in the game a lot across the board, but it is what it is, and I think that's some sort of great points. But we are sort of seeing as well, I think for me, there are some of the bigger clubs as well, I've noticed too, David, who sort of have gone back to doing some like, I wouldn't say tougher training, but sort of we've seen some Premier clubs this year kind of start the pre-season with like really some heavy running and that sort of stuff. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, because technology kind of took the game in a certain direction. You had the likes of, say, the Arsene Wengers in this world who sort of, really went forward with sports science, and we saw like the heart rate monitors, that, the zones and the technology. But have you seen, like, not a full circle, but some clubs going back to doing, say, some heavy running and sort of, I wouldn't say old school stuff, but really pushing the players to the limits as well?
Yeah, I think sports science obviously kind of became became more involved probably around the time Arsene Wenger was coming in, really, kind of mid-90s and beyond that. And I think Sports Science kind of got a bit of a bad rep, really, in terms of you try and protect players by not exposing to things. How you make robust. You don't make robust athletes like that. So yes, obviously collecting all this data is really, really important, but interpreting that in terms of making robust athletes, because injury rates haven't really changed necessarily in that time. So how much has sports science really improved that side of it? It's obviously made a lot of improvements in terms of recovery or just general athleticism, but in terms of injury prevention, is that even a thing? I'm not sure we do too much. I think obviously the work that Tim Gablett's done over the last decade or so in terms of the acute chronic workload ratio and kind of building players up to a high training load has certainly got a place. And it's not necessarily, you're not protecting players by not exposing them to things. It's the way you expose them to it and keep them at a high training load. So in terms of, obviously, I mean, Spurs have got quite a bit of publicity this week.
So I was thinking,
that's also kind of one end of the spectrum completely. But I think there's certainly a place for that kind of stuff in terms of building volume. So I think sports sciences maybe try to protect players too much. I think these guys are high level athletes, so you can expose them to more, and actually you're probably going to get better gains from that. By exposing them to stuff, it's just the way you expose it to them and when during the season.
Absolutely,
The way football is just now, it's almost a 12-month season, so the only real time you really get to expose them to different stimulus is probably pre-season, because the rest of the time it's 2 games a week for the rest of the year, really. So
absolutely,
I think I'm not. Obviously, I've got no insight into what Spurs are doing. So
you kind of picked up what I was thinking anyway. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I suppose it's hard to. I mean, like you said, from the outside looking in, there's a lot of variables at play. You know, it's hard to know. You know, why they decide to run that way. I mean, who knows? To be fair, but it does go to show. I think one thing it does show, obviously, to players across the board, that like you do tend to sometimes get in football. I wouldn't say knee-jerk reactions, but you kind of, what happens, say, like teams will see what other teams do and think, well, this is the way forward. And I suppose it's getting that balance really between, between all things and knowing your own team as well in terms of, I suppose. But do you think there's maybe a psychological element to it in terms of maybe say, sort of exposing the players to that sort of workload? Do you think there's a psychological element as well to say, okay, well, you can break maybe a psychological barrier in terms of your own mindset?
Yeah, so to be honest, that's the conversation we've had with our under-18s this year, who are kind of new to the full-time environment. In terms of, when you know more of this than I do, but kind of when you're tired, that's almost like 4% of your capacity. So when your brain's telling you to stop, you've certainly got more capacity to get through. And I think at that point it becomes more of a mentality thing. But even going back to kind of different training methods, Jurgen Klopp kind of got criticised a little bit when he first came into Liverpool, because they got not hundreds, but loads of hamstring injuries because of the way that he was training them, in terms of like repeated sprints and high pressing, and the players adapt to it. So if you're fully aware that you're going to get injuries, and you've got a squad size that can kind of absorb that, you are going to hopefully over time get better athletes at the end of it. You can also see that the success that Liverpool have had over the last 5 years or so is probably testament to that in the way that they play. I think I'd say it's that road to if you've only got a small squad that can't kind of absorb that kind of injury rate, then it's probably not the way to train. But if you've got a larger squad and everyone involved in that decision making process is aware of what could happen and happy with it, then there's also kind of an outcome at the end of it, really.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I think it's sort of knowing your own squad and players and teams, and I suppose on top of that, different players are. I suppose the recruitment process is going to be a key factor, looking at the individual players as well. Just sort of from a testing point of view, is that something that you do because obviously different sports sciences have got a different take on. I guess they're all going to have a way of measuring where the players are up to, that's for sure. But in terms of that, fitness testing yourself, what's your take on it, David? Where do you sort of see fitness testing in terms of football for you? What's your sort of take on that?
I mean, I think with any test, it's got to reflect the kind of the needs of the sport. So I think what we do in football won't necessarily be what you do in, say, tennis or basketball, because the physical requirements are much different. But I think in terms of how football is, I think you're working on a lot of different engine systems. There's also long periods where you may be working at a low intensity, but then you need these repeated bursts, you need to jump, you need to land, you need to twist and turn, you need to hit max speed. So our kind of testing battery is kind of reflective of that, in terms of we'll try and test a lot of different things. So we'll do an endurance test. So we've kind of played about with a few different tests. I've used the 30-15 test in the past. We'll use kind of 100-metre shuttles and kind of time to finish as the score for that. We'll then look at kind of change direction ability. We'll look at 5, 10, 20, 30 metre sprint speed. We'll look at jump height, but we'll also look at kind of unilateral jump height as well, because you want to make sure that they're not too asymmetrical, because if you've got a massive left to right imbalance, that's potentially an injury risk, and that we need to address. So we'll kind of look at it at that angle, really, albeit we know that you're going to spend half your life as a football player stood on one leg because you pass the ball with one foot or the other. So we know we're going to kind of have some asymmetries, but it's to make sure it's not an excessive one. And that whole testing batch will kind of inform where we are in terms of what we do in the gym with them. So if someone's really, really strong already, but not particularly powerful, then we'll maybe have more of a power bias towards what we give them in the gym. Whereas if they don't have that foundational strength, we'll maybe have more focus on that. I think that the challenge with academy football is we've also got to kind of consider the maturation element as well.
So, definitely.
And that's hugely important in terms of benchmarking, for want of a better term. So you might have an under 14 who's already gone through kind of their peak high velocity, they're a fully developed athlete, and they're biologically maybe 17 or 18. Whereas you might have someone else in the under 14 group who's biologically 11 or 12. You can't compare them kind of to each other pure because the one who's not gone through adolescence yet has got a massive disadvantage from a physical point of view, and we're not expecting them to hit the same numbers as kind of their peers yet. So we'll try and factor that into kind of talent ID with the coaches in terms of what we'd give them in the gym. And then when they are going through that peak high velocity, we've obviously got to consider kind of adolescent awkwardness when you kind of look like Bambi and retrain on fundamental movements. So I think in terms of the testing batches that we have, it's probably a lot more varied than you maybe get at first team level. And even at under 18s level, you kind of like a bit of, you've got a gap to bridge. So they've come through the academy system, so you're looking back at the previous data. In terms of that, you may have a couple of late developers that are still going through maturation at that point, and you're still going to factor that in, albeit in a full-time environment. But you've also got to kind of start comparing up to the first team, because in Scotland that is the next step. Whereas in England you've maybe got an under 21 squad, but that's not the case in Scotland. So in under 18s it's a massive step to first team.
So straight to first team, wow! I didn't really.
Where we're at. It's not something that I necessarily agree with. I think there is scope to. They got rid of the reserve league. It's maybe something we should look at, maybe bringing back a little bit. I think from a play development point of view, because there's not many players you necessarily see at 17, 18 years old who are eventually going to a first team.
I mean that's
at Premiership level. So
that's a really interesting point. To be fair, I mean that's fascinating. I think that in terms of we see players sometimes get released at 18 and they come back in the game. They're a whole different player. Obviously, everyone develops differently, but I think that's sort of really interesting stuff, really, in terms of how. But what's the outlet for them there, David? Say if they do get released at 18 and they don't make first team.
I mean, obviously, not everyone is going to make the football player. And that's probably the hardest part of my role. When players do get released, but I think a large part of anyone's job in the academy is having a good exit strategy. So we've got a good link with kind of lower league Scottish clubs, and hope that they'll kind of recommend them. St Mirren's got a pretty good reputation generally from an academy point of view in terms of developing players, so we'll tend to get players into different clubs, so that in itself is success, getting them into a club. But if you've kind of got real high hopes for a player to make in the first team but maybe not quite ready at that point, there's obviously the loan system that we use, so whether it's kind of the Scottish non-league or the lower leagues of the Scottish league, we'll kind of look at doing that as well. Because, like I said, under 18 is a massive gap to make it at first team level. There'll be a few players that are ready, but for the most part probably aren't. And we need to kind of give them time for that, because as you say, players will develop at their own rate. So we've got to kind of consider that when we're making decisions on player futures, really.
No, definitely, and interesting you say as well. I think sometimes for me, because I do a little bit of work. I'm just been doing something this evening with a semi-pro team, and sometimes you do get pros, so not pros, but like XYTs. They might sort of get released, and I think for me, there is a big difference. I think in some respects, in terms of like even sort of when you go down to sort of semi-pro and you're playing against sort of obviously grown men for the it can be a big jump for players. Do you find that's the sort of case sometimes that players think, okay, well, I'll go into like a few levels down, and I'm not saying they underestimate it, but they probably sort of have a big realization that it's pretty tough, in semi-pro and the lower leagues can be pretty tough sort of going, to be fair, for a number of reasons, obviously a number of variables as well, but generally, obviously, you're playing against sort of grown men and 18-year-old, it can be a bit of an eye-opener for them, do you think?
Absolutely, and I think that's important, and that's kind of a massive kind of limitation of academy football, really, is that generally it's about the technical ability and kind of how they play when on the ball, but when it's almost like we'll have it for a bit, now you have it for a bit, and it becomes a little bit sterile, and that's sort of something that's been thrown at the academy system in England and Scotland, really. So I think that having that experience of lower league football or non-league football where the result on a Saturday matters because you might have a win bonus and you've got bills to pay.
Absolutely.
There's a different edge to the result, and that's when it becomes a little bit more physical and the result actually matters. And I think that's an important thing for young players to experience, because it's not necessarily something you can properly replicate in an academy.
Yeah, absolutely.
System, really. So,
I
think it's certainly got a place in terms of developing players and exposing them to that side of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, all you can do is just give them the best opportunity, like you says. I mean, obviously people like yourself who are very good at what you do, and you sort of cover every variable. And I mean, I think it's I suppose in football, there's no one's under any illusions in terms of the percentage that go on to play pro. It's tough, really. So it is important for me the players do their education, and obviously I think obviously that at some point there's going to be a life after football, irrespective of what level you play or where you are. That's for sure. So that's one key thing. But I suppose it's one of them. You give it your best shot and see where the sort of road takes you, type thing. And in terms of yourself, David, your sort of vision yourself in terms of obviously more of the same. You keep going, and obviously you're doing great work at St Mirren. Obviously I'm sure you'll have your goals with the team and other stuff. But is that sort of for you your vision? Just keep going and see where the road takes you, type thing.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think there's a lot of scope to really develop what we're doing at St Mirren. I think we're doing a good job in terms of bringing players through, but in terms of what we deliver from a science and medicine point of view, you always think you can do better. So I think that's probably something that I really want to kind of explore and make sure that we're doing that as best as we can and providing the best service we possibly can to the players that we've got at the club. Really, so I think a big thing that I'm kind of want to introduce a little bit more is kind of getting away from that early specialisation, which probably seems a little bit odd and counterintuitive, really, being in what is essentially a specialised environment. Being in a football academy, there are also kids who are going to play football and specialise in that, but we know that probably results in burnt out athletes by the age of 14 or 15. And even from a kind of an injury point of view, if you just train the same movement patterns all the time and just playing football, you're going to get injuries. There's kind of a lot of evidence come out about kind of sampling different sports and exposing to different movement types. As kids, we've got all these synapses firing and the brain's
definitely
plastic thing that we can really mould, and if we start exposing them to different stuff from a young age, we're going to develop better athletes, whereas if we just focus on one sport,
absolutely, 100%.
We know that there's this process of synaptic pruning where the brain, if it's not, those pathways aren't being used, Rangers stopped using them because it's kind of a waste of time. So we've got a very limited time in terms of being able to develop that physical literacy and movement.
Yeah, definitely.
Youth, and I think we've got a really good kind of opportunity to start training that. Certainly within a football academy, in terms of if we can start exposing to stuff within our programme.
Yeah.
Then we can probably develop better movers and therefore better athletes when they're coming into the full-time environment, and then we can really kind of reach their potential
absolutely
within our programme. Really. So that's something that I'll kind of hope to do kind of whilst I'm in my role at St Mirren, and really maximise the benefit that kind of programme could bring, really.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, you make some really interesting points, and also that I think that when you mentioned the fitness testing too, I think that's really interesting too. And I think that for me, like the sort of reliability and validity of it, obviously, people like yourself, experts like yourself, I think it's really, great data. And I mean, one thing that's sort of in sort of my experience of sort of helping out here and there, and sometimes you get sort of players will say they've got certain results in fitness tests, but you kind of wonder how reliable the data is in terms of like they might say, I got this in the bleep test type thing, but it's one of them, I suppose, that we just say the data is only as good as it's reliable and valid in terms of the way the test is administered as well. So because obviously we've got a lot of people listening to the show from different walks of life, sport, professionals, semi-pro, amateurs and that sort of stuff really. But how important do you think it is to sort of, if you are going to do like a series of fitness tests, to make sure they are done as reliable and valid as possible in terms of data?
Yeah, I think you've got to kind of be quite stringent with your methods, otherwise there's no point in doing it. I think in kind of an applied setting, though, that can be difficult at times compared to maybe a lab-based test. Because there's certain variables that you can't control for example, at St Mirren we don't have an indoor area, so when we do our testing it's outdoors, and the weather in Paisley is quite unpredictable, so there'll be wind or rain or and that's also not something you can control for. I think you've almost got to try and interpret the results knowing the constraints that you've got.
Great.
And so it's obviously not necessarily designed to be used in studies, so I don't think it's necessarily important to be absolutely stringent so that we can get it through and publish it, but as long as we can take what we need from it.
Yeah, absolutely,
If that makes sense. So
100%.
That's probably the biggest constraint we've got in terms of being able to control for things like the weather, or
absolutely,
even academy football. When do they do PE? So they come to do an endurance test having done a double PE session at school, and therefore that's obviously going to affect the results. So you can't necessarily control for what's happening outside of the club as well.
100%, and that's it.
And I think you're more looking at the general trend rather than a specific score.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's more like, in terms of the whole point of long-term athletic development, you're looking at the long-term, not have you made an improvement in the last 6 weeks. It's have you made an improvement over the last 12 months or 2 seasons, or
good.
How are they coping with going through maturation? Are they coping well, or are they struggling a little bit? And there's also a lot of stakeholders in that as well. We've obviously got a reasonably big team of kind of sports scientists, physios, myself, who will kind of oversee it all, and we've all got a part to play in kind of managing that, really. So the testing, we don't necessarily use an absolute yes or no to how a player is doing. It's more about just a commentary on what they're doing more than anything.
Absolutely, that's a great.
And seeing where the weaknesses are that we need to work on, or even where the strengths are that we can really enhance. Yeah,
and absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really useful to anyone listening for sure. Whether they're semi-pro, amateur, whatever. And I mean, this show obviously being a pre-record, I've just done a bleep test with the lads, the semi-pro team tonight, and it's obviously really hot. It's really hot here at the moment. Been really, really warm. Some have finished work. They've come from a full day's work and that sort of stuff, and the semi-pro and that sort of thing. But I suppose, like you said, for reasons you mentioned there, it gives us an indication. Obviously, if there's sort of some of the players that, getting low scores, then you kind of think, okay, there's a red flag there type thing if they're coming in at say 9-10. But generally speaking, if they're sort of getting that 11, 12, you think, okay, well, that gives us an idea going into the season. But then you do get players who'll say, David, they've done it before and they've got a 14, for example, and you kind of think, well, how reliable is that data? I mean, it's like one of them, it's like we're doing it outdoors today, it's hot, and that sort of stuff that's going to affect it. But sometimes you get data coming in, you think, well, okay, how reliable is the data? You kind of think, how much of the corners did you cut type thing, or have you done it at 15 metres and not 20? So I think that's the sort of key things. I think it's great hearing that from people like yourself, really, because obviously you know what it's like in this game. It can be a lonely sport, football, because you do look and see what other people are doing, look at the science, the literature, that sort of stuff. Really, it's always good to sort of share a few ideas here and there. But that's been great stuff. But yeah, I've been grateful for your time. I think it's been great speaking to you. No doubt our listeners have sort of got a lot out of it. That's for sure. Even the ones who aren't involved in sport, I think it's a great insight for them to hear. What goes on at professional clubs. It's an insight for them, really, in terms of we have a lot of people who are passionate about sport, and we want to raise awareness and participation in the game as well. And the people who are interested in sport, I think, just sort of knowing what goes on in sport is a great thing. So I'm sort of conscious of time. I've been really grateful to sort of join us on the show. So I want to thank you, Dave, for joining on the show, and I wish you all the best in the forthcoming season. That's for sure. And thanks again, Dave, for coming on board the show.
Again, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Brilliant. That was David Hartley, who was really kind enough to join us on the show. He's been at the University of Salford, just up the road from here, not too far away. He's the head of Academy in Sports Science Medicine at St Mirren Football Club Academy. Obviously a club that, huge respect for, doing great things, really interesting insights into his work, and know that you've sort of, if you are involved in the game, got a lot out of it. If you aren't, I'm sure it's a great insight to hear what goes on in football around the world. On 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.